Good afternoon. My name is Hannah Demchuk. I am a special education teacher and a practicing psychologist. Today, I am presenting my own course for teachers working with children with special educational needs. The aim of the course is to equip teachers with a coherent system of knowledge, skills, and competencies for properly organizing the educational process and preparing for practice. We will address preparing the class, group, and the wider student and parent communities for the integration of a child with special educational needs into the educational environment. We will also examine key factors in a teacher's work, preparing the physical material environment and the role of the Inclusive Resource Center, IRC, and the psychopedagogical support team in working with a child in an inclusive setting. So, what is inclusion and why does it matter? According to the Ministry of Education, in the 2021 school year, there were 25,000 students with special educational needs and 18,681 inclusive classes. By 2024-2025, the number of students reached 47,610 and the number of inclusive classes 33,397. Inclusion means the active participation of all citizens in social life, regardless of their physical, intellectual, cultural, linguistic, national, or other characteristics. The idea of inclusion, born from recognizing the value of human diversity and differences, rejects any discrimination and reflects a core feature of a democratic society. All children are valued members of society and have equal rights, including the right to education, regardless of the characteristics of their psychophysical development. At the same time, many people equate inclusion only with disability. Persons with disabilities are those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments that may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. However, children who need inclusive education may not have a disability, they may have special educational needs, SEN. Under the law of Ukraine on education, a child with SN is a person who requires additional, permanent, or temporary support in the educational process to secure their right to education. Inclusive education involves creating a learning environment that meets the needs and capabilities of every child, regardless of the specifics of their psychophysical development. It is a flexible, individualized system for educating children with psychophysical differences in mainstream schools at their place of residence. Instruction follows an individual education plan and is supported by medical, social, and psychopedagogical services. Foundations and benefits of inclusive education. Inclusive learning is based on the idea of ending any discrimination against children and ensuring the same positive attitude toward every child. Inclusive education is about finding ways to provide education, not reasons to deny it. Core values of inclusive education. Every child is an individual. All children can learn. Each child has unique abilities, characteristics, and interests. Discrimination in any form is prohibited. Every person has the right to participate in society. Tolerance toward one another and acceptance of people with their individual differences. Education in the spirit of tolerance. How the inclusive process differs from traditional schooling. Children with special educational needs, CN, study in mainstream schools and receive the additional support they need. Educational goals are set individually for each child with SEN, depending on the child's developmental profile. An individual development program is created for the child. If needed, an individual curriculum is also developed. Assessment criteria are adapted to the child's individual characteristics. Academic results are not the sole or main criterion of success. Parents actively participate in the educational process and have corresponding responsibilities. Advantages of inclusive education. For children with SEN, the opportunity to study in their local school, socialization with peers, access to educational, including additional services. For other children, understanding of diversity, learning to naturally accept and relate respectfully to peers with SEN, building and maintaining friendships with children who are different from them. For parents of children with SEN, the opportunity to participate in decisions about their child's education, better understanding of their child's needs. For parents of other children, a broader understanding and perception of inclusive education, opportunities to support other parents. For educators, Working in inclusive classes encourages professional growth and mastery of diverse methods for teaching and supporting children with SN. Inclusive education also fosters staff collaboration and a team-based approach to the educational process, as well as access to methodological and consultative support from inclusive resource centers, IRCs. For school administrators, creating special conditions in schools, ensuring barrier-free access to buildings and classrooms, providing the necessary teaching and methodological materials. For society, fostering active community members who contribute to the development of the state. What are the drawbacks of the inclusive model of education? Parents of children with special educational needs, SEN, may witness their children being rejected by typically developing peers. Parents of children with SEN may notice developmental differences between their children and their peers and suffer because of this. Children with SEN may receive insufficient rehabilitation and other specialized services. Children with SEN may not be accepted by their classmates. Evidently, when building an inclusive education system, we should lean on all the positives while also accounting for the downsides of a process widely recognized as one of the most innovative movements in 21st century education. National legislation in the field of inclusive education Constitution of Ukraine, 1996. Article 21 states that all people are free and equal in their dignity and rights, and Article 53 emphasizes that the state ensures the accessibility and free provision of preschool, complete general secondary, vocational, and higher education in state and municipal educational institutions. In 2010, amendments were made to the law of Ukraine on general secondary education, under which children with SEN were granted the possibility to obtain general secondary education remotely, as well as in special and inclusive classes of general secondary schools. During this period, the first regulatory documents on the implementation of inclusive education in Ukraine were approved, including a Cabinet of Ministers order on approving the action plan for introducing inclusive and integrated education and the introduction of the Individual Development Program. In addition, the law guarantees persons with SEN access to psychological and pedagogical, correctional, and developmental services and to learning through the most accessible languages, methods, and means of communication for them, including instruction in sign language and in Braille. According to Ministry of Education and Science Order number 609 of June 8, 2018, on approving the model regulation on the psychological and pedagogical support team for a child with special educational needs in general secondary and preschool education institutions, every inclusive school must have a psychological and pedagogical support team. This team includes the principal or deputy principal for academic affairs, teachers, teachers' assistants, a school psychologist, a social pedagogue, a special education teacher, as required by the child's needs, a rehabilitation teacher, a representative of the Inclusive Resource Center, IRC, and the child's parents or legal guardians. Legal. Inclusive Resource Centers in Ukraine. Ukraine's course toward European integration requires a revision of state education policy priorities, including the adoption of international approaches to educating children with special educational needs, SEN, based on equal opportunities and access to quality education. The fulfillment of these tasks directly depends on how effectively inclusive resource centers, IRCs, operate, particularly on their ability to conduct a comprehensive psychopedagogical assessment of a child's development, establish whether a child has special educational needs, develop recommendations for organizing inclusive education, ensure the provision of psychopedagogical assistance to the child, provide methodological support to educators and parents, ensure systematic, qualified support for children. IRCs are institutions established to secure the right of children with SEN aged 2 to 18 to obtain preschool and general secondary education, including in vocational institutions and other education providers that deliver general secondary education by conducting comprehensive psychopedagogical assessments, providing psychopedagogical and correctional developmental services, and ensuring their systematic qualified support. The work of IRCs is grounded in the child's right to education and is guided by the following principles: respect for and acceptance of children's individual differences, adherence to the best interests of the child, non-discrimination and protection of the child's rights, confidentiality, accessibility of educational services from an early age, interagency cooperation. Functions and tasks of IRCs include expert and diagnostic, information and analytical, organizational, methodological, consultative, provision of psychopedagogical and correctional developmental services, psychopedagogical support, outreach, educational, public awareness, professional development and enhancement of staff qualifications. Children with learning difficulties. Among the causes of learning difficulties, certain psychophysical developmental disorders prevail. Learning challenges are associated with functional limitations in hearing, speech, and language, academic abilities, capacity to learn, attention, coordination, perception and information processing, and cognitive flexibility. Students who experience these issues have difficulties with memorizing and recalling information from memory, sustaining attention, and applying acquired knowledge, skills, and habits. Students with speech and language disorders often have functional or organic abnormalities of the central nervous system. They frequently complain of headaches, nausea, and dizziness. Many children show balance disorders, impaired coordination of movements, poor differentiation of finger movements and articulatory movements. During learning activities, they tire quickly and become fatigued. Irritability, excitability, and emotional instability are common. They often exhibit unstable attention and memory, a low level of self regulation, disruptions in cognitive activity, and reduced mental work capacity. Neurotic type reactions to comments, low grades, or unfavorable remarks from teachers or peers are frequent. A distinct subgroup among children with speech and language disorders includes those with disorders of reading and writing processes. Support for such children must be comprehensive and provided by a team of specialists, a neurologist, a speech language therapist, a psychologist, and a teacher. The effectiveness of the work largely depends on timely interventions and the choice of optimal methods and pace of instruction. Children with delayed mental development. Delayed mental development can be caused by many factors, including hereditary predisposition, impaired brain function during the prenatal period, birth complications, chronic and long lasting illnesses in early childhood, and inappropriate upbringing conditions, among others. A significant proportion of children with delayed mental development, having received timely remedial support, master the curricular material and catch up by the end of primary school. At the same time, many students in subsequent years of schooling require special conditions for organizing the educational process due to marked difficulties in mastering academic material. A student who has such difficulties needs thorough psychopedagogical assessment to determine optimal and effective teaching methods. Work with the parents of these children is especially important since their understanding of the nature of the difficulties and appropriate support within the family will help overcome learning challenges. Children with visual impairments. As of today in Ukraine, visual impairments rank first among other disorders. This group includes blind individuals, about 10%, and those with low vision. People are considered blind if visual sensations are completely absent or if only a minimal light perception remains, visual acuity up to 0.04. People are considered low vision if they have a significant decrease in vision within 0.05, 0.4 when using corrective lenses. The primary cause of reduced visual acuity is congenital eye diseases or anomalies, 70% of cases. Eye diseases lead to complex visual function disorders, reduced acuity, narrowed visual field, and impaired depth perception. Due to incomplete or distorted perception of the environment, these children's representations are somewhat impoverished and fragmented. Information received is poorly retained. They experience difficulties with reading, writing, and practical tasks. They tire quickly, which lowers both mental and physical period. Саме тому вони потребують дозованого зорового навантаження та охоронного режиму під час організації навчального процесу. З огляду на те, що упродовж навчання зір учнів може змінюватися, відповідно змінюватимуться офтальмологічні рекомендації, необхідна скоординована робота педагогів, шкільного лікаря, офтальмолога та батьків, які мають тримати під контролем допустимі фізичні та зорові навантаження учня. Children with visual impairments. Impairment is often used to describe a wide range of conditions related to reduced hearing, including deafness. Deafness is defined as a complete absence of hearing or a profound reduction in hearing that makes the perception and recognition of spoken language impossible. Partial hearing loss can be compensated with hearing aids and cochlear implants. Under appropriate learning conditions, children with hearing loss develop spoken communication and auditory skills, enabling them to study successfully in mainstream schools and pursue higher and vocational education. At the same time, certain features of students with hearing impairments must be considered. Some hard of hearing students can hear, but perceive individual sounds in a distorted way, especially initial and final sounds in words. In such cases, it is necessary to speak somewhat louder and more clearly, finding a comfortable volume for the student. In other cases, you may need to lower your pitch, since the student may be unable to perceive high frequencies. In any case, the teacher should review the student's medical record and consult with the school doctor, an otolaryngologist, ENT, a teacher of the deaf, a speech therapist, the parents, and the student's previous teachers to establish and maintain the special conditions required for the student's learning. Children with musculoskeletal disorders. Such conditions are observed in 5 to 7% of children and may be congenital or acquired. Among musculoskeletal disorders, the following are distinguished: diseases of the nervous system, cerebral palsy, poliomyelitis, congenital musculoskeletal pathologies, congenital hip dislocation, torticollis, clubfoot and other foot deformities, spinal anomalies, scoliosis, underdevelopment and defects of the limbs, e.g., anomalies of finger development, arthrogryposis, congenital joint contractures, acquired diseases and injuries of the musculoskeletal system, traumatic injuries of the spinal cord and limbs, polyarthritis, diseases of the skeleton, tuberculosis, bone tumors, osteomyelitis, systemic skeletal diseases, chondrodystrophy, rickets. In all these children, the leading issue is underdevelopment, impairment, or loss of motor functions. The predominant condition among these disorders is cerebral palsy, about 90%. To adapt the social environment, it is necessary to prepare teachers and classmates to perceive a child with such impairments as an ordinary student. Depending on the severity of the impairment, children may move independently, on crutches, with a walker, or in a wheelchair. Many of them can study in a mainstream school provided there is a barrier-free environment and special equipment, writing aids, splints that help better control hand movements, a workstation that allows maintaining a certain body position, etc. In addition to therapeutic services and special equipment, children with cerebral palsy may need assistive technology, in particular, communication devices, from very simple to highly sophisticated, communication boards with pictures, symbols, letters, or words. The student can communicate by pointing with a finger or eyes. There are also more advanced devices with speech synthesizers that help talk to others. Computer technologies, from simple electronic devices to complex computer programs operated with adapted keys. Children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, one of the more common conditions, affecting, according to various estimates, 3 to 5% to 8-15% of children and 4 to 5% of adults. The causes of this condition are still being studied. Among the contributing factors are hereditary and somatic physical issues. Such children may show a cluster of clinical, physiological, psychological, and biochemical changes, and at times minimal brain dysfunction, an umbrella term for different pathological states that manifest as combined difficulties in perception, motor skills, and attention, etc. At the same time, this condition can resemble a range of other issues: neuroses, delayed mental development, autism, and some psychiatric disorders. Sometimes ADHD is difficult to distinguish from age-appropriate motor activity or from temperamental traits of individual children. The condition is observed more often in boys. Characteristic signs of ADHD include excessive activity, attention difficulties, impulsivity in social behavior, relationship problems, behavioral issues, learning difficulties, low academic performance, and low self-esteem, among others. If psychological and pedagogical support is not provided in time, the condition in adolescence may develop into antisocial behavior. When a teacher notices signs of ADHD, they should involve a team of specialists: a psychologist, neurologist, physician, and the parents. In some cases, medication may be required. In day-to-day work and communication with the student, all team members should follow a shared behavior strategy. Family psychological training can also be helpful to lower stress in the family, reduce the likelihood of conflicts in social interactions with the child, and help parents develop positive communication skills with their child. Children with early childhood autism, low contact children. Limited sociability in a child can stem from various reasons: shyness, sensitivity, fearfulness, emotional disorders, or a low need for communication. Characteristics of low contact children: inability to organize joint play and form friendships with peers, lack of responsiveness to people, indifference to displays of affection or physical contact, avoidance of emotional attachments, negativistic reactions to requests, insufficient eye contact and facial, mimic responses, heightened anxiety when interacting with other people. These features may be caused by a specific mental disorder, early childhood autism, a set of features in children with EKA-ASD, a fixed or piercing gaze, dislikes physical contact, avoids hugs, inadequate reaction to new situations, lack of contact with peers, doesn't communicate, tries to run away, aggression toward animals and children, self-aggression, delays in chewing and self-care skills, refusal to communicate, echolalia, repetition of identical or similar sound combinations, speaking about oneself in the third person, Olenka can't eat, support for the child sessions with a psychologist, ensuring attention and love, a sense of safety, gradual habituation to touch, facial responses and independence, use of music, poems, and jigsaw puzzles. Corrective work with autistic children, it is conventionally divided into two stages. Stage 1, establishing emotional contact, overcoming negativism in communication with adults, neutralizing fears. Adults should remember the 5 don'ts. Don't speak loudly, don't make abrupt movements, don't stare into the child's eyes, don't address the child directly, don't be overly active or intrusive. To establish contact, find an approach that matches the child's abilities and invite them into interaction with an adult. Contact and communication are built by supporting the child's simple, age inappropriate but effective expressions and stereotyped actions through play. Examples: if the child flaps their hands, the adult organizes the game Butterflies Are Flying. If the child runs in circles, play I'll Catch You. At first, demands should be minimal. Consider it a success if the child agrees to be nearby and passively follows the adult's actions. If the child doesn't complete a task, switch attention to an easier one. Don't insist or push the child into a negative reaction. After finishing a task, celebrate the success together. Stage 2, overcoming difficulties of purposeful activity, teaching special behavior norms, developing abilities. Purposeful activity is very important for children with autism. They tire quickly and get distracted, even by interesting tasks. Prevention includes frequent changes of activities and taking into account the child's willingness to interact with the teacher. The content of sessions should be activities the child likes and that provide pleasant sensory experiences, i.e., their interests and preferences must be considered. Children with autism have a specific need for constancy in their environment and adherence to established routines. The adult should not only engage the child but also understand their inner world and take their perspective on reality. Unfortunately, higher feelings, such as sympathy and empathy, develop with great difficulty in autistic children. During learning, students with special needs encounter various psychological barriers, which makes it necessary to create specific conditions for preparing this group of learners. This includes adapting the educational process to their needs, organizing socio-psychological support, preparing teachers to work in specific conditions, and creating a barrier-free environment. The distinctive task of the school psychologist working with students with special needs is to create socio-pedagogical conditions that foster self-regulation, help them achieve their goals, enable different behavioral strategies, and support flexible adaptation. It is important to create a safe atmosphere free from external judgment. However, a school psychologist cannot solve a student's problems for them. Rather, they should help the individual define a personal stance, develop independence from external influences, build self-confidence, and support self-actualization in overcoming obstacles. A student with special needs who realistically assesses their situation and recognizes their own self-actualization achieves emotional and mental well-being and becomes a socially integrated individual. Psychological studies by many scholars indicate that most students with special needs face significant learning-related difficulties. They often feel isolated and lose faith in their abilities. Heightened anxiety, irritability, and emotional disorders are common. They experience a severe lack of social contacts and difficulties in interpersonal relationships. In interactions, they frequently assume subordinate roles, show an increased need for protection, and often shift responsibility for decision making to others. Their speech is dominated by words such as loneliness, incapacity, helplessness, and meaninglessness of life. They have low self-esteem and insecurity, and they lose confidence in themselves and in their potential for self-realization, particularly in the personal sphere, creating their own family and raising children. In the development of a child with special educational needs, SCN, several stages of socialization can be identified. Stage 1, entering society. At this stage, the socialization of a child with SEN cannot be achieved without involving the parents. The family, as a social institution, is called to socialize the child. It is the natural environment for the child's physical, spiritual, intellectual, cultural, and social development and is responsible for creating appropriate conditions. In the family, the first ideas about human values, the nature of relationships between people, and the child's moral qualities are formed. The success of socialization in the family depends on how adequately family members respond to the child's developmental characteristics. On a psychological level, families typically pass through several stages in perceiving a child with SEN. Confusion and fear. Parents feel helpless and anxious about the child's future. At this time, the foundations for a socio emotional bond between parents and the child are formed. Denial. Shock transforms into denial of the diagnosis. An extreme form, harmful to education, is refusal to undergo a comprehensive psychopedagogical assessment and accept any psychopedagogical support. Depression. As the family begins to accept the child's SN and assess the situation more realistically, psychological adaptation based on full acceptance of the child's SN, motivated engagement, parents actively seek support for the child and make plans for the future. There is a clear link between how a family perceives a child with SEN and the child's socialization prospects. The main task of educators and psychologists is to help parents see their child with SEN as a person. It is important that the family feels teachers' attention, their interest in the child's development, and their readiness to help in upbringing. Key family factors that most influence successful socialization of a child with SEN: respect for the child, accepting the child as they are, praise and encouragement, talking with the child, listening and observing, highlighting the child's strengths, using requests, not commands, as the most effective way to give instructions. Work of educators and psychologists with parents of students with SEN includes establishing contact and building trusting partnership relationships, integrating parents of children with SEN into the wider parent community of the class, ongoing interaction and information exchange about learning, upbringing, interests, and personal qualities of the child, involving parents in developing the IPR, individual program of development, and individual learning plans, in the overall learning and upbringing process, and in extracurricular activities. Establishing effective cooperation with other members of the psychopedagogical support team, jointly developing general recommendations on children's development, learning, and upbringing to help parents feel more comfortable and confident at home and at school. Involving parents in creating the child's portfolio, ensuring the school provides conditions for social pedagogical support to families raising children with SEN. Main forms of collaboration with parents in inclusive education: parent meetings, conversations, group, individual, collective, consultations, seminars, trainings, business simulations, role plays, home visits, open days, open lessons for parents, parent information corners, and thematic newsletters, newspapers. Psychological and pedagogical conditions for the socialization of a child with special educational needs in an educational institution. The next stage of socialization is the child's experience within an educational institution. Inclusive education is a key aspect here. Vygotsky emphasized that the nature of a person's upbringing is entirely determined by the social environment in which they grow and develop. He stressed the anti-pedagogical nature of the rule, whereby for convenience, homogeneous groups of children with SN are formed. By doing so, we not only go against the natural tendency in children's development, but, more importantly, we deprive such a child of collective cooperation and communication with others who are developmentally ahead, thereby complicating rather than facilitating their development. A child with SEN reaches toward a child who is more advanced. This difference in intellectual levels is a crucial condition for collective activity. The main agents of school socialization are teachers and psychologists who, in fulfilling the tasks assigned to this institution, must create an intermediate model of children's relationships with the social world. Although the teacher's socializing function at this stage approaches the educative one, there is still a distinction between them. The formal side of the institution's activity, the educational process, assumes the formation of a certain system of a student's knowledge, skills, and competencies. Objects of change within the educational socializing environment may include curriculum content, adaptation, modification of the program in line with the child's potential, enrichment of the elective part with civics, socialization courses, and career orientation electives. Forms of organizing the teaching learning process. Learning may take place together with peers or based on an individual learning plan for a child with SEN who may attend selected lessons or activities. Assessment of learning outcomes. Assessment may be carried out according to general criteria used in general secondary education or according to criteria and the scope of material defined by the child's individual learning program. For external standardized assessment, special conditions are created in line with the requirements of universal design and/or reasonable accommodation, including the possibility of using personal assistive equipment and adapting test content to their educational needs. Basic principles for organizing a teacher's work with children with SN. Accept students with SN as any other children in the class. Include them in the same types of activities while setting differentiated tasks. Engage students in collaborative forms of work during lessons. Involve them in shared extracurricular and out-of-school activities, celebrations, games, contests, excursions, etc. Key directions in the socialization of the child's personality. Development of the intellectual sphere, development of the speech and emotional spheres, support in overcoming socio-pedagogical difficulties and age-related crises, building a positive self-concept, focusing on the child's strengths, formation and consolidation of positive moral foundations of the personality, adaptation within the peer group, inclusion in the class collective, involvement in socially significant activities of the school and volunteering. Psychopedagogical support team for a child with special educational needs to ensure the effectiveness of the educational process for children with special educational needs, SAN, who study in inclusive classes at general secondary schools. A psychopedagogical support team, PPST, is established. Psychopedagogical support is a comprehensive system of measures for organizing the educational process and a child's development as provided by the Individual Development Program IDP Eucharich IPR. The PPST is responsible for collecting information about the child's developmental profile, interests, difficulties, and educational needs at the stages of creating, implementing, and monitoring the IDP, determining the areas of psychopedagogical and correctional developmental services that can be provided within the school based on the conclusion of the Inclusive Resource Center, IRC, and ensuring these services are delivered. Developing an IDP for each child with SEN and monitoring its implementation to make adjustments and track the child's developmental dynamics, providing methodological support to school staff on organizing inclusive education, creating appropriate conditions for integrating children with SEN into the educational environment, conducting consultations with parents of children with SEN regarding their development, learning, and upbringing, carrying out information and awareness raising activities within the school among staff, parents, and students to prevent discrimination and rights violations and to foster friendly, unbiased attitudes toward children with SEN. PPST composition. Permanent members, the principal or vice principal for academic affairs, primary school teacher or homeroom teacher, subject teacher, teacher's assistant, school psychologist, social pedagogue, special education teacher as needed for the child's profile, rehabilitation teacher, and the child's parents or legal guardians, others as needed, associated specialists as needed, the school healthcare worker, physician, personal assistant to the child, specialists from social protection services, child welfare services, and others. Overall leadership of the PPST rests with the principal or vice principal for academic affairs, who is responsible for fulfilling the PPST's tasks and distributing functions among its members. Based on the IRC conclusion and, where available, the child's individual rehabilitation program for a child with a disability, the PPST develops the child's IDP within 2 weeks from the start of the educational process. The IDP is agreed with the parents and approved by the school head. The PPST reviews the IDP twice a year to adjust it and to determine the child's progress, more often if needed. According to the child's individual characteristics, the PPST develops the IDP within the general secondary school and determines ways to adapt and, if necessary, modify the learning environment and instructional materials in line with the child's potential and individual developmental profile. Psychopedagogical and correctional developmental services are provided through individual and group sessions. If difficulties arise in implementing the IDP, the PPST consults IRC specialists for methodological support. The PPST prepares and agrees with parents the schedule of psychopedagogical and correctional developmental sessions for the child with SEN. to be delivered by school staff and/or invited IRC specialists, other institutions, organizations, or qualified individuals authorized to provide educational services. Individual learning plan and individualized curriculum as components of a child's individual development program, SEN. Individual learning plan, ILP. The ILP is one of the most important tools for working with children who have special educational needs, SEN. It is a formal document that contains detailed information about the child and the services they must receive. The plan is developed by a team of teachers and specialists and coordinates their efforts to design a comprehensive program of work with the child. Parents are active participants in developing the ILP as they know their child best. The ILP specifies the required accommodations and modifications and serves as the basis for further lesson planning. Teachers and specialists collaborate to integrate additional services into the learning process. Sometimes a student needs more intensive or highly specialized services that can only be provided in a particular setting, e.g., sessions using special equipment. In such cases, it is advisable to arrange these with an appropriate provider. Accommodations and modifications. Appropriate environmental adaptations enable children with SEN to learn in a general education classroom. When designing the plan, attention should be paid to necessary classroom, space arrangements, instructional methods used, materials and equipment, and the child's sensory and other needs, duration and revision. An ILP is usually developed for 1 year. However, it may be modified, for example, if the child has achieved the set goal, the child is experiencing difficulty reaching the goals. There is a need to increase the amount of services, the child transfers to another school, behavior concerns emerge, monitoring progress. An integral part of ILP development is assessing and collecting information about the student's progress. After some time, the teacher and specialist review the child's achievements, determine how effective the plan is, and share information with the child's parents. Individualized curriculum, IC. In an inclusive class, a child's IC is developed on the basis of the standard curricula of general secondary education, including special curricula with appropriate adaptations. When preparing the IC, teachers first analyze how the curriculum requirements and instructional methods used in lessons align with the child's actual and potential abilities. Teachers should keep in mind that instruction may be play-based, include frequent repetition, direct modeling of task performance, and clear verbal instructions. In the teaching learning process, the teaching assistant devotes significant attention to developing self-care skills within the school environment. Typical components of an ILP include general information about the child, name, age, address, phone, parents' names, type of developmental impairment, date of school enrollment, ILP validity period, current level of knowledge and skills, findings from observations and assessments, what the child can do, strengths, what they cannot yet do, and areas needing support. These data must be as accurate as possible, as they form the basis for setting subsequent goals and tasks. Technologies for individualizing the educational process. Person-centered learning. Technologies for individualizing the educational process are ways of organizing teaching in which the choice of pedagogical tools and the pace of learning take into account students' individual characteristics, the level of development of their abilities, special educational needs, SEN, and prior learning experience. Below are examples of such individualization. Person-centered learning places the child's personality, uniqueness, and intrinsic worth at the center. It is based on a person-centered approach, i.e., orienting instruction to the learner's capacities, motives, goals, and interests. Within this approach, the teacher defines the lesson objectives and organizes, guides, and adjusts the educational process according to the learner's needs and their level of knowledge, skills, and abilities. The result of inclusive education is not limited to knowledge. It can also be newly formed skills and competencies. Organizing inclusive education means that the selection and use of content, methods, and tools must be viewed through the lens of the learner, their SEN, abilities, intellectual level, and other individual psychological characteristics, key features of person-centered learning. The child is an active subject of cognition and communication. The goal is the development of the learner's personality with regard to their abilities and inclinations. The teacher treats the child as a highest value. The teacher's strategy is to create situations that maximize each learner's potential for individual growth. Every student recognizes individuality in themselves and others, has self-respect, and respects others' dignity. Teacher-student collaboration follows an adult-adult model, equal positions. The student has opportunities for independent thinking, autonomy, and choice. Attention is given to identifying each learner's own ways of learning, the most effective modes of understanding for them. The learner is given freedom to choose the types of activities where they can express themselves as an individual, interests, needs, abilities. The teacher cultivates empathy, benevolence, and the ability to take the learner's perspective. Person-centered learning aims to turn the learner into an active agent of learning and to provide opportunities for an individual educational trajectory. It is not merely taking differences into account, but organizing learning conditions that embed and include students' psychophysical characteristics in the process. Differentiated teaching. The theoretical basis of differentiated teaching includes, on the one hand, a child needs-oriented learning concept, and on the other, the principle of using diverse forms of organizing the educational process. From the outset, differentiated teaching assumes that all students are different. Therefore, the teacher's task is to identify those differences, adapt the learning process accordingly, and ensure a meaningful learning experience for everyone. Differentiated teaching helps the teacher account for the following student differences: readiness level, by adjusting the pace of learning and the level of difficulty, individual learning styles, by organizing multiple types of activities so students can receive and process information in different ways and at different levels. Interests, drawing on special educational needs, SN, a learner's interests and their motivation to master a topic or skill. Differentiated teaching is the teacher's response to students' SN at the levels of content, what students should learn, and how they will access information, process, the learning activities students engage in to make sense of and master the content, product outcomes, what allows students to apply, consolidate, deepen, and improve acquired knowledge, skills, and abilities, e.g., essays, projects, specific activities, and their results. Differentiation of content aligns goals, tasks, and expected academic, developmental, social outcomes. The balance between goals and tasks determines the level of content differentiation. To support the content, specific elements and materials are modified: actions, concepts, generalizations, principles, attitudes, and skills. In a differentiated classroom, changes are most often seen in how students access learning. Differentiation of process. A flexible grouping system is used consistently. It is crucial to employ flexible methods of forming groups. As knowledge or new material is mastered, students should interact and work together. Teachers may first discuss key ideas with the whole class, followed by work in small groups or pairs. Group formation should not be fixed. As a core element of differentiated teaching, grouping and regrouping must be dynamic, changing with the content, project, and results of periodic assessment. Differentiation of product, learning outcomes. A key requirement is initial and ongoing assessment of students' readiness and progress. Baseline and formative assessments provide teachers with information to choose effective instructional strategies and supports that reflect students' varied needs, interests, and abilities. Assessment may be formal or informal, including interviews, surveys. Problem-based learning. Problem-based learning is an organization of the educational process that involves creating problem situations under the teacher's guidance and students' active, independent work to solve them. As a result, students creatively master knowledge, skills, and abilities and develop their intellectual capacities. The core element of problem-based learning is the problem situation, which has its own functional characteristics. A problem situation is when a learner wants to solve tasks that are difficult for them but lacks the necessary information and must find it independently. Psychological conditions for using problem-based learning with students with special educational needs, SEN. Problem situations should align with the goals of building a system of knowledge. They must be accessible to students and match their cognitive abilities. Problem situations should trigger students' own cognitive activity. Tasks should be such that a student cannot complete them by relying only on existing knowledge, yet are sufficient for independently analyzing the problem and finding the unknown. Main methods of problem-based learning include targeted task method. To help students better understand new material, they are offered preparatory tasks that get them ready to grasp new concepts, make their own discoveries, and independently solve problems. Algorithmic method. Sometimes students work silently at the board or cannot clearly explain a task they are solving. To address this, the teacher provides a sample answer, or more precisely, a list of step-by-step instructions, an algorithm, either pre-made or developed with the class. Students read it and complete exercises simultaneously. The algorithm should be brief, a plan, a scheme, etc. Question and answer method. A new topic is explained through a guided discussion. By responding to a series of teacher questions, students independently arrive at certain conclusions. This is what distinguishes problem-based learning from traditional instruction. Its advantages include high student independence, the development of cognitive interest or personal motivation, and the growth of students' intellectual abilities. Project-based learning. Project-based learning is an approach in which knowledge and skills are acquired through planning and completing practical tasks, projects. Core requirements a teacher should know: the presence of a meaningful research or creative problem that requires integrated knowledge and inquiry to solve. Practical, theoretical, and cognitive significance of the expected result. Independent student activity, individual, pair, or group. Clear structuring of the project content with stage-by-stage deliverables. Use of research methods, defining the problem and its tasks, proposing solution hypotheses, discussing research methods, presenting final results, analyzing data, summing up, revising, and drawing conclusions. Tangible project outcomes, a report, presentation, journal, photo album. Projects can be differentiated by primary type of activity, creative, social, research, role play, inquiry, game based. Subject domain, environmental, mathematics, cultural studies, legal, information, ICT, arts. Participation format and duration, individual, pair, group, collective, short term, medium term, long term. Nature of partnership, cooperative, common, competitive. Level of interdisciplinarity, single subject or cross curricular. Form of presentation, visual, multimedia, role play, creative, etc. How this shifts the teacher's role. Implementing project based learning transforms the teacher from a transmitter of ready made knowledge into an organizer of students' inquiry. The teacher becomes an independent consultant, while students take on the role of active participants. Key advantages, not just transferring a body of knowledge, but teaching students to obtain knowledge independently and apply it to new tasks, building skills to gather information, analyze it, and draw conclusions, developing students' communication skills. As a result of project based learning, the knowledge, skills, and abilities acquired are not only particularly robust and well understood, but also associated with a sense of satisfaction, fueling further curiosity and learning. Assessment of inclusive learning outcomes. Learning assessment is the process of determining and expressing, through grades and the teacher's evaluative judgments, the extent to which students have mastered knowledge. Core functions of assessment, monitoring, determines a student's level of achievement and readiness to learn new material. Instructional, supports review, clarification, deepening, and systematization of knowledge, improves skills. Diagnostic corrective, identifies causes of learning difficulties, detects gaps, and guides corrective actions. Motivational, builds positive learning motivation. Formative, character building, fosters responsibility, focus, the use of self check, and self control. Depending on SEND, students may be assessed by the General Secondary Education Program, by a special program for students with visual, hearing, or speech impairments, with developmental delay, musculoskeletal disorders, intellectual disabilities, or complex developmental disorders. Didactic principles for assessing students with SEN in an inclusive class, systematic continuous assessment across all stages of learning, comprehensive evaluates learning outcomes and the effect of psycho-pedagogical and remedial services, considers mastery of knowledge, skills, and competencies, differentiation and individualization, account for each child's developmental characteristics and their impact on learning, objectivity, assess learning outcomes against stated criteria, not the student's personality, motivational value, feedback and grades should encourage improvement. Portfolio as an assessment tool. A portfolio is a cumulative assessment system that helps students set goals and plan organize their own learning. It helps teachers reveal a child's individual potential and track progress for students with SEN. A portfolio is a strong motivator, showcasing the student's best work and abilities. Dear colleagues, we are finishing the course but not the journey. Inclusion is not a set of instructions but a culture. The child at the center, safety and dignity, partnership and trust. During the course, we explored the IDP and ILP, adaptations and modifications, formative assessment, the work of the support team, and cooperation with IRCs. But the main thing we take with us is confidence. Every child can learn, and change begins with us. Inclusion is never perfect. It is sincere, living, sometimes fragile. It is born from our willingness to ask questions, notice small steps forward, learn from mistakes, and protect our own resources. Each of our classrooms is a community where a child has the right to be themselves and adults to be a team. Please take 3 tomorrows with you. One small change to a lesson that will make it more accessible, one open conversation with parents as partners to better understand a child's individuality, one note about the child's progress so we can see the movement and celebrate successes. Thank you for your attention to detail, to words, and to the child. Thank you for the courage to try and not give up. May every classroom have more room for difference, more support, and more joy in learning. And let us remember, inclusion is when everyone truly means each one. Until we meet again, and to our shared victories.